Okay, by now. Okay, thank you everybody for attending. Welcome to the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notification or requests to use Welsh today, therefore the meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, can you switch off or silence your mobile phones, and ensure you speak clearly into your microphone. I need to remind you that the meeting is being webcast. In case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. I don't think we're expecting any fire alarms, so if they do go off, we should probably move. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting. So do we have any apologies?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from councillors Glyn Caron, Richard Overton, Rose Seaborn, Cathy Evans and Colette Thomas.
Thank you. Item 2 then, declarations of interest. I'll go over to legal and ask if there's any advice on declarations.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I remind members that if they do have any declarations, they should record them, please, in the appropriate declaration sheet which is going around with the attendance register. In relation to the matters on the agenda today, Chair, then in relation to agenda item 6, the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee update report, that deals with two schools specifically, namely Crossy-Ceiliog School and Pontier Church in Wales School. Therefore, any members who have any particular connection to either of those schools may want to declare a personal-only interest. I think you yourself, Chair, wish to declare a personal-only interest in that matter because you are on the Board of Governors of Crossy-Ceiliog School. Is that correct, Chair?
That's correct. That is correct, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if members have any other questions. The only other point I'd make is that in relation to item 5 on the agenda, which deals with exclusions, attendance and education other than at schools, that report considers all of the schools in the borough as far as I'm aware, and therefore whilst specific schools are mentioned in the body of it, I would not expect any members to wish to declare a personal interest in relation to that particular report. As I say, the difference between that one and agenda item 6 is it's a borough-wide report. So I don't know if members have got any questions on that. Right, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay then, item 3 then, minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October 2018. Can I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and can confirm that they are an accurate account of the meeting? So are there any issues anyone's come across first? No, are we happy to confirm them then? Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll scroll past the Welsh on that. Find where we are. Okay. Item 4, the action sheet. Are there any actions outstanding? Do we have any updates? No. Do members have any questions on the action sheet? No. Okay. Just to say, we've had an email from Councillor Seaborn who can't be here today on the action sheet. So she was unhappy with one of the responses, I think. If we can just read it out and we'll just note it for the minutes. Yes, this is on the plan. The plan should be put together with the knowledge of all stakeholders and should be presented to elected members before acceptance by the PSB. Surely such contribution will only strengthen the plan prior to agreement. I think in the response from the exec member it said that there was no scope for it at this time for more stakeholder engagement, but perhaps we can send it back and ask to say, when they're looking to have a wider engagement programme. Okay. Agenda item 5 then. Exclusions, attendance and EOTS. Purpose of this report is to provide committee members with an evaluation and progress report on exclusions, attendance and out-of-school education policies and processes within our schools. So I'm going to welcome Sharon Davis, Head of Learning, Donna Lewis, the Senior ALM Manager, I'm not sure if you want to just all introduce yourself, actually.
I'm Sharon Davis.
You would like to just provide a brief overview of the report, or what you feel are the main points that we should. Yes, absolutely. Sorry. In particular, if I draw your attention to two schools, our secondary schools, Abersychan and Cwmbran High, who 3 years ago were in benchmark quartile 4 and are now in benchmark quartile 1. So they've worked extremely hard with the EW service, with LA, accessing support and guidance from us, and we've seen a shift in their attendance there. So now we're looking at other schools then within the borough to visit those schools, and we know schools have, where they're seeing their attendance possibly having a dip or remaining static, to share the good practice that are in those schools there. On the primary settings, we've seen for the past 3 years, we've gone from I'm going to have to double check, 94.8, we are now 94.5. Last year we went down 0.2, this year we've gone down 0.1. We do have some more work to do. The strategies, we launched the 95 plus strategy in January. We did review it in the summer term. It is early days. We are seeing that that's having a positive impact in the secondaries. It's a bit slower in the primaries, but we are seeing a shift now. After the review, we've reviewed the strategy as well, aligned the flowcharts to make the system, the strategy, a bit more streamlined, because instead of going around here, why don't we just go straight through here? And that was with the EWOs. We've taken that back to schools as well, and we are seeing a shift. So we are hoping that we'll see that improvement at the end of the year. We will review the strategy again now in January, because it's been a whole year then since it's been the implementation of it. So not quite as rosy a picture in primary, but it has slowed down the decrease, and the verified data will be released in December. So at the minute we're unable to see where we compare to the rest of Wales, where we can in secondary. Yeah, it's a very positive picture. We don't know whether our decline is in line with the rest of Wales or not. So unfortunately we can't comment on that. Do you want to take questions on attendance first and then move on to another section, or?
It's how you want to.
Do you feel? Shall we look at attendance first then? And okay. Anybody have any questions then on the attendance part of the report?
Yeah, you mentioned the strike for 95. How are we making sure that there's a consistent approach to the strike for 95 policy across all the schools in the borough?
All our schools have the strategy. All the resources are with our schools, including the initial posters. Everything is there with them. Within the strategy, there are very clear flowcharts for the schools, and then equally for EWO. So obviously, as you know, attendance is the school's ownership. We are there to support and guide, and if there are problems further down, that the schools then
are finding that they've tried everything possible, then the EW service then can take those issues further. But the strategy, it has everything in here that all the schools need, and in light of that, there's a model policy which schools have and can adjust and personalise at school level. But also, there's a member of the SLT from each school that has responsibility for attendance.
Right.
And so the drive comes from that strategic element from an SLT member. Now, it doesn't have to be a head teacher. In some schools it is. In other schools it's a member of the SLT. And that then, as governors, some of you are governors, you should see that coming through in the heads report. You should have a breakdown on your attendance, and therefore you can further ask those questions if and when you need to. So you should see the trail coming through there.
Hello. I know it's a stupid question, or is it? Do they still do the school bobby?
Well,
What the old, what you would call a school bobby, is actually the education welfare officer, and that's what we do. So yeah, this is just not called that. It's just they know they're called as education welfare officers.
Question on the schools that are perhaps struggling a bit with attendance. Is there a approach to dealing with things like dental appointments and doctor appointments? Because that's one of the things we identified in our school. Because basically children weren't turning up for the first registration because they had appointments. So if they turn up for the registration, get registered, then have that appointment. And that was making a significant difference. Just wondered something that could be contributed. Because it's been identified as a huge issue in every school, where children have been pulled out by parents either for the dentist or the doctor or whatever it might be during actual school time.
and in some cases, they don't turn up all day then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's managing that situation, having a unified approach. I don't know whether there's a policy across the borough for that. We're managing in our school now, and we've got robust systems in place to eliminate that as an issue.
Let's tackle for the Strive for 95 strategy, which is across, and that's it also within the attendance policy that's there. It's also about that consistent approach about from the day one responses. It's about the message going out to parents to say that this isn't acceptable, that, you know, that it is about, as you said, if you are having a dentist appointment, try and get them into registration first, get their mark, and then do it, and then bring them straight back. And that's where we're seeing where the policy and the strategy is being adhered to, and where we've got the SLT are being very proactive. So those first day responses, when we're getting the messages through, it's about that consistent message going back to parents, hitting them every time, saying, actually, can you next time do it this time? And as you said, when you get that approach, it's working. And it's also where we're seeing that's worked really well in some schools, is getting other schools then to go out and see how does that look on a day-to-day basis. Because it is that consistent approach, that bam, 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 every time when it happens, it's being on top of it. Absolutely.
I mean, it's managing it. It's
Yeah.
getting the child in. Sorry, getting the child in, getting them registered, and then normally they miss a lesson, if maybe that. But as I was also going to say, is there a policy for managing schools that are using a lot of supply teachers? Because that's the other issue we identify, where supply teachers are not familiar with the registration procedure, and registration and everything is not getting recorded properly for reporting purposes.
That's where we have the conversations then with that SLT member, the senior leadership member, to ensure that every school policy is shared with whatever supply teacher, whether it is the attendance and how that's recorded and what method that is, or whether it's the ALN, if there's children in the class that have care plans. All that information should be disseminated down to the supply teacher so that they're as prepared as they are going into that classroom.
Sorry, final question. Would there be benefits in the borough looking at electronic systems? I'm aware in some schools in some parts of the country, particularly England, they are getting to a system where they swipe on the classroom door.
We do have an electronic system in place. It's not a swipe on the classroom door, but that's something I'm sure we'll see how we progress, and that's going to have budgetary implications as well on our school budgets, and we all know how tight they are. But there is an electronic system in place that all our schools access, SIMS, where registration is via SIMS on the which is an electronic one, and that's a consistent approach across Torfaen.
The absenteeism of the children that's taken out of school from holidays mount up into this.
We're seeing an increase in that, even though they're being unauthorised, and we've got schools that are really doing that. Obviously, they're taking their hits then. We are seeing that holidays is one of the main causes for the increases in unauthorised attendance, but we're seeing that across Wales as well. When we're looking at the statistics, that's one of the reasons across Wales as well. And it is unfortunate because our schools, most of our schools, if not all of our schools, are very good at unauthorising them. However, it's getting that message to parents. It's that constant message to parents to say, do you know, if you're missing X amount of school, this is the effect it's having.
Any fines issued?
We haven't had any schools issuing fines, asking for support for fixed term penalties as of yet. We do prosecute, but we haven't issued any, schools haven't issued any fixed term penalties in Torfaen.
I wanted to ask, it's probably a bit of a horrible question, but obviously our main message is, you know, send your children to school to do well. But obviously our data this year, the correlation isn't there between attendance and achievement. So basically, how are we looking to get around this? I mean, I know some schools are very proactive. They'll have a family liaison officer who works very closely with parents, etc. And also, you know, that work is starting to filter through. But how are we sort of achieving that message, you know, when they can look at data and say, well, you know, it hasn't worked, so why should I, you know?
It's about the quality of teaching and learning. It comes down to the quality of teaching and learning. If students have access to good quality teaching and learning that's engaging, where they're learning, they'll want to come. There's less of an excuse not to come. We are working as a local authority with the EAS on improving our teaching and learning across the board, where we have red schools, amber schools. That's part of their support plans, is to improve teaching and learning. We are seeing an improvement, however, that's not going to happen overnight. It's about chipping away at that, but that's definitely on our radar because that's the only way we're going to improve our standards. It's got to be down to good quality teaching and learning. So we are very aware of it. We are working tirelessly to improve the quality of teaching and learning.
Obviously there's been a slight decrease in primary school attendance. Do we know the reasons behind that, and is that sort of authorised absence, unauthorised absence? And then looking at this, there are a number of schools that have remained in benchmark 4-1 and listed some of the great things they're doing. Is that being shared? Are the schools working together to share that kind of best practice?
Yes. For example, we have one primary school that has some excellent working practices they've implemented this year and has made a significant difference from the same period of time last year. So these some of the other schools that I'm working with. I've explained to them what they've done, and I've arranged for them to come with me to visit the other schools so they can see what they're doing and implement that into their own schools. And I'm doing that in a number of schools. So I've done that in primary and secondary.
Just to come back to the first part of the question, it comes back to what somebody asked earlier about it's an increase in holidays we're seeing is the main one. Yeah.
Okay.
In 2 points on that one, do you think it would be a good idea that some of the schools started finding these parents? And the second question is is there any method, and I know some child on the bus told me that they do if they don't attend school, their parents get a text message saying, you said, oh, your daughter's not in school today. Now, is that something all over the borough? Or?
The latter part is the school can buy into that, so it's down to individual schools then to see what system they use. Some buy into the text messaging and emails and such forth, and they get alerts. It depends on individual schools in that respect. Some, that they don't buy into that, but they do it themselves. They have their own attendance officers in schools that do exactly the same. But it depends. Some buy into the app, some don't. But we try and encourage, it's about the approach rather than a particular app, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you remind me what the first part was? As a local authority, we don't find it's down to individual schools to issue the fixed penalty notices, and we will support in that case. We've had no requests as of yet to issue fixed penalty notices. We do prosecute parents, that's slightly different. Would you, Vicky, do you want to explain a bit more about prosecution?
Yes. Prosecution is something that happens when we've exhausted all other avenues. So it's not the first go-to, it's the last. So the school would have completed all their actions in line with the Strive for 95, then refer to the Education Welfare Service, and we work together with the school. We don't work on our own, but it's with the school. We then put in strategies and arrange meetings and make sure the pupils, as long as the age appropriate, is there for pupil voice. And once we've exhausted every avenue and attendance is clearly not improving, and we can see that it's not because of the parents' non-engagement in the process, to be then consider prosecution.
Is there any way we just talk to schools and ask them to fetch in our system? Because obviously there was a big one on the news the other day where one person went to court and tried to appeal against it, and he lost his case, didn't he? I think, if you could, nice to get all the headmasters down here and have a chaplain, wouldn't they?
It's all in the 95 plus strategy. There's information on there about fixed penalty notices. It is down to the individual schools at the end of the day. And as I said, we do use other avenues if we need to, if we feel that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you've got all this, like, as if you want to just been looking at now, Westmoreland, places like that. I know a lot of the children out of the school with their parents' permission anyway, but I think you need to hit these targets, and I think that's a good option, is for taxes to go out and fines to go out. If you had a sort of a Torvine, what's the word? It was Devon Torvine. You made a decision and sort of said, right, you've got to do it, you've got to start taxing, or you've got to start fining these parents. Because you say you're going through a procedure, how many times has that child got to miss school? If you find them once, they think, well, you ain't doing that again, and that's one off you, it could be 4 or 5 before you go through the system. Do you know what I mean?
Just to answer that, the fines are not really a deterrent for parents. They're often saying, it's cheaper for us to pay the fine than it is to go on holiday. So, I've had an experience where a parent brought £60 in and said, I want to pay it up front. So it's not a deterrent as the way you think it is. But when we talk about unauthorised holidays, let's forget the fact that it's a holiday. It's an unauthorised absence, no matter where they are. And we deal with that unauthorised absence as we would in any other way, in any other unauthorised absence. So if it did go to prosecution, in actual fact, the potential outcome of a prosecution is more significant than it would be if it was just a fixed penalty notice. And I've just had a recent case where I've pointed this out to a parent, and it's had the desired effect.
One more. We all know the reason why is because the holiday companies think it's funny to put prices up when the children are in school, on their school holidays, and that is why the parents. I've had people say to me that reason why. He said, if I get a fixed fine penalty, 60, I'm saving £500 or £600 anyway. So I see your point of view there.
Just going on the other side from fines, then, do you help and encourage schools to have an award system for good attendance targets? Because if a group of children in a year cohort know they're going to get a bowling trip at the end of the term because they're hitting their targets, the incentive's there. And they're more likely to turn around and say, Mum, I'm not going on that holiday because I'm going to lose out my bowling trip because of that. And I know we've done it in our school, and again, it's been very successful. But it's also carpet bombing the school. It's no point just having a big banner on the gate. It's getting outside every classroom block, every classroom door, really driving the message home. And that's what we've done, and it's proven its worth.
And that's what the strategy is all about. It's about rewarding the positive rather than concentrating on the negative. And the policies, the strategy is very much about that. And part of the strategy as well is every child that's got 95 plus gets put into a pool regardless of age. And then in the summer term, we pulled out names, and they had £50 each. So we know, I can give you last year's winners if you like. There was a foundation phase child from Padre Pio. There was a Key Stage 2 child from Blenheim, Key Stage 3 from St Albans, and Key Stage 4 from Cross y Ceiliog. They were put into a draw, and this is well noted through the strategy. The schools give out rewards as well, and individual schools also add on top of that their own rewards as well to encourage that. And from the LA, they got a £50 reward each. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't really cost a lot, really, in terms of what you're getting from it. You've got the children, they're learning, they're doing what we want them to do. Absolutely. For secondary schools, however, there is a slight budgetary cost because we know bowling trips and such forth, they're quite big ticket winners and they don't come cheap. But as you said, you've got to weigh up, if you get your attendance in, you've got your students in, it's all about that coming back to standards, it's all about raising the whole education experience for those learners.
Yeah. Can I come in on that Sean, actually? Because one of my concerns, especially at primary level, not so much at secondary, is the exclusion of children. So, you know, you have an end of year reward for the school hitting the target, for example, and excluding children from trips, parties, etc., which is not nice. I mean, some of those kids are going to be ill. They can't come in, especially with, you know, your primary level. You've got the 48-hour rule for sickness, a week for... So, my question is, do we have a consistent policy or advice to schools, really, on that? And, encouragement to have, like, a stretch reward. So, you know, we're going to have a disco, and if we hit the target, or, you know, above our target, we will have an entertainer at the disco or something, you know, so that everyone is included.
Sorry. I was just discussing with a school in Torfaen only recently about that very thing. So you could have every half term, if you've got 100% attendance for that half term, then you would have a ticket which you could put your name on and pop in the box. So then, if you're ill that half term, it refreshes for the next month. You've always got that chance. So I know a school in Torfaen is doing that.
We are seeing individual schools have adapted, they're sticking to the strategy but have added other layers on top, and that's where we're seeing then encouraging other schools then to go out and visit to see actually if this is best practice, it's having a positive effect on their attendance. But within the strategy, it's not all about spending money, it's about letters going home to parents to say, oh, well done, little Johnny, he's been in 95 plus, he's been in, and having those letters on a consistent, because it boosts the children. Lots of our schools are doing it during assemblies, they have celebration assemblies, they're giving out dojos and all various other things that really work with the children, and they're having that positive effect on their parents, as you said. No, I want to go to school. I don't want to, yeah.
Text messages or emails.
Absolutely, and phone calls as well, because sometimes we're so used to saying, oh, little Johnny's done this today, parents dread having the phone call. It's about promoting the positive as well.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the prosecution stuff. What are the numbers on in terms of cases that have gone that far? And once they've gone that far, do you see a difference? Does it have the desired effect that those children then start attending?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. In some Yes, in some cases, yes, and it's had the desired effect even before it's got to court. So, you know, when they've received the summons, you can immediately see a difference, a shift in the parents' attitude in sending their children to school. And even just the threat of prosecution in a meeting where we've done everything we can and say, look, you know, we now have to issue a first warning notice, even just at that point there, you can see attendance improve. So it does have, not in all cases, I must admit, not in all cases, but in quite a number of them, I would say it does have the desired effect, yeah.
And also, just to come back on what Vicky said earlier, it's the last resort, not the first resort. Everything else that possibly can be done between the school and then us as a service has been done. And it's about the disengagement of the parents, because sometimes it's not the pupil's fault in some respects.
If then it doesn't have the desired effect, which obviously is not in the majority of cases, if it doesn't, where do you go then?
Well, there's two levels of prosecution. There's the first level, and that's a fine up to £1,500 per parent per child. The next level is the higher level, and that can be up to £2,500 per parent per child, or 3 months prison sentence, or both. So they are made fully aware of that, right? You know, if the attendance doesn't improve and it goes to court, then the parents are made, or guardians are made fully aware of what the potential steps could be going forward. Things have improved in that area, I would say.
Overall.
Yeah, overall.
It would be useful then to have that data of how many warning letters have been issued and how many prosecutions. Would it not?
We can send that to you.
Well, I'm just wondering why it's not in the data.
And not the warning letter, but do you mean warning letters, or do you mean actual
how many warning letters have
prosecutions?
been issued? How many prosecutions were
We can
undertaken?
break that down and into schools.
Well,
I don't have that information
detail,
with me now.
but certainly I'm just wondering why it's not in the data anyway. That would seem to me a logical place to put it anyway.
Yeah, but we can send that to you. We don't have that now.
The other thing that I come across, and I talked to a few people in my ward about, is are you aware, or do you know that any child is caring for a parent or parents, and where the child is obviously deserves a medal, but are you aware that if that child doesn't turn in, that there's a possibility his mother or his father could be?
So I'll take this one. We have all the young carer information. It's part of our vulnerable groups tracking and monitoring. So what we do is we have a system where those that young people are identified as young carers, and those that are involved with our social care young carers service, we get termly lists of pupils. They are all then inputted on our one data system. So all young carers asked for any vulnerable group are highlighted, and those lists then are within the school and within the education welfare system. So any of our vulnerable groups or children that would be vulnerable learners are tracked and monitored. So we monitor their attendance regularly, and obviously all the education welfare officers have all that data and information so that they can check to see what's happening. Like you said, they might have other commitments, or there might be other reasons why they're unable to attend. So that's always taken as a factor.
The point I was getting at is, like, you know the ones, but what if somebody's sort of, say, a single mother with a child, or a single father with a child? If he suddenly becomes ill, he's got no other family, if you sent a warning letter out, or email, or phone calls, and they sort of said, oh, I'm not very well this week, the child is staying home, would that be marked as an absence, or do you take that as a, you know, like a carer for that certain person, or does it never happen? Obviously it does happen.
It would depend on each individual circumstance. You can't have a blanket answer to that, to be honest. If the school felt that it was a genuine absence and there was, and there's nothing else that parent could do, then they can authorise it. But at the end of the day, it's the school that would authorise or unauthorise that absence, depending on their knowledge of that particular family.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, just going on from that really, we know at the moment there's lots written and lots in the media about young people with anxiety and mental health issues and all those really complex issues, and we know there's a link as well then to time off school. So what have we got in place to support those pupils to remain in school, to keep attending?
We work obviously very closely with pupil support, that the PRO has an anxiety base as well. So it's about conversations with the school. It's ensuring that the school is doing everything it can and is demonstrating it's doing everything it can to assist that young person during its school life. And where that young person needs additional support, the school then comes to the LA and we help them guide and source that depending on the needs of those individual children.
We also have part of like I said, we have a pupil referral unit where we have an anxiety group for those young people who have obviously very significant issues with social and emotional difficulties and anxiety. On top of that, obviously part of our outreach service also work with children who have social emotional anxiety within their own schools and can give school strategies and support. The last academic year we've also started working with the Gwent Attachment Service, and our pupil referral unit is undertaking a significant amount of work for those young people, and obviously to go into our outreach system, and we're at the point of where one of our secondary schools is actually going to be working with them, and that's the CAMS, the Gwent Attachment Service CAMS work is actually going in and working with the schools and giving them lots of training, advice and support, but also that problem solving for initial pupils, because it can be very, very individual circumstances. On top of that, obviously we also have the CAMS InReach project, which is starting, and they are offering a myriad of training, advice and support for schools, and obviously with the wellbeing agenda and the ACES agenda, there's lots of training and advice for support for schools now, and systems being put in place to support that. So obviously as a local authority we're all involved in that. I've done the training with the EAS for ACES, and a number of our other staff are also involved with the InReach project and with Gwent Attachment Service. So there's a lot going on to support young people at the moment and work with young people with those particular difficulties.
And that's the counselling services in our schools as well, that they can access a whole range of things depending on the level of need.
It's sort of going into talk about out-of-school education a bit later, but with attendance, so I noticed that for the anxiety group, for example, there were still spaces, it's under capacity. So what are the sort of strain on the services that we are offering? And obviously, the worry is, of course, looking at national trends, that people suffering with anxiety or, these sorts of issues will come out of school entirely rather than continue to engage with any sort of provision. So, I was just wondering what the sort of strain is like, and are we seeing that?
It's as Donna says, it's looking at each individual needs, it's looking at what have they accessed within schools, what are schools offering them, and how can we support that further then. And obviously we'd want to keep our young people in school as much as we can and not go to the anxiety base. That's the first place to go. It's to see, well, how can we get them to be self-sufficient, to be resilient, to give them those skills, those life skills that they're going to need. And it is looking at each individual and working with the schools to see what's on offer, and if that's becoming a blocker, if then the need is more complex, it's then, right, where do we go next with this young person? Do we have any more questions on attendance? I think, should we move on to...
If I start with exclusions, first of all, as you can see from the report, obviously there's a lot of data and information in here, but the general picture for exclusions across Torfaen over the last 8 years since we've started with all our support and the current support and strategies is very encouraging, and we've seen a 52% reduction in the days lost to exclusion over the last 8 years. Broken down, that's 50% at secondary, 58 at primary and 72 at the pupil referral unit. So obviously very, very encouraging that our pupils are staying in school, and if they are being excluded, it's for shorter periods of time, so they're unable to continue with their education. The number of exclusions issued as well has also reduced by 31%, which is also encouraging because, like I said, the actual number of young people in exclusions and the days lost over the last 8 years has decreased. Over the last 3 years, if we look at primary schools in particularly, over the last 3 years we've seen a 59.3% reduction in primary schools. So our primary schools exclude very rarely, and actually there were 10 primary schools last year who issued no exclusions whatsoever, with a further 9 issuing less than 5 days. So you can see actually the majority of our schools, the young people are in school, they're not being excluded because schools have put in a range of strategies, supports and systems to help and support the pupil, because actually exclusion is a last resort for that pupil, and in terms of inclusion, about keeping the young people in school is obviously a high priority for us. Of the schools that have excluded, our top excluding primary schools, as you can see from the data, have reduced their exclusions over time, which is what we would expect, and we're continuing to see that downward trend, which is very encouraging. Obviously, every year, when you're talking about small numbers of exclusions and pupils, one pupil can obviously cause a spike within a school. So some of the schools we did see a rise last year, that accounts for 1 or 2 pupils within that school. So obviously when you're talking about small amounts of data, that can skew the data quite a bit. So particularly for primary schools, it's very encouraging. Secondary schools, we did have a slight increase last year. But like I said, 7 exclusions, which in the scheme of things still means over the 3-year period we are down 57 exclusions. So again, over that 3-year trend we are down. And again, for the days lost, we are still down, and you can see from some of the graphical representations, some of our schools have made huge strides, particularly Abersychan and Cwmbran High. You can see, that trajectory of really reducing the exclusions over time. Others of our schools have different profiles, and it's up and down year in, year out. But like I said, overall, over the 3 years, we are seeing a trend of reduction, which is obviously what we'd want to see. Obviously, we've got still work to do in secondary schools, and obviously they're a very different organisation compared to primary schools, so we've still got quite a bit of work to do there, but actually overall the picture is more promising, and certainly we're seeing those reductions as we would hope. Yeah.
Yes, Chair. Well, I appreciate and thank you for the efforts that you put in reduction of exclusions at secondary school, which is what I'll concentrate on. It's important to make the point, of course, that some exclusions are necessary, and that, for instance, I make the observation here that, for instance, you notice that Westmont has a significant increase in exclusions, and of course its level 2+ results have gone up significantly. Other schools where there have been reduction in exclusions, their level 2+ results are poor. Well, I'm not saying there's a correlation there. That is as it is. While it's important to talk about the needs of those who are excluded, which is vital, it's also important to fully be aware of the needs of those who are left behind, who can then get on with their lessons and not be disturbed by the actions of certain individuals. And certainly we sat here the last year in the scrutiny subcommittee and listened to head teachers who've told us, of course, that there are 1 or 2 pupils who can actually cause a massive disruption of learning in a primary school, and of course take up an inordinate amount of time as well. So sometimes there is no alternative, is there? And because of the amount of time that's spent by a certain amount of people dealing with a certain amount of pupils, unfortunately, who take up an inordinate amount of time to the detriment of every other pupil. So it's important. I think it's important to be aware of the necessary concern of trying to reduce these numbers. It still is an important technique of school improvement, actually. And to me, the importance is not so much the exclusion, but the provision that's available for those who are excluded, and the fact that they so often need significant help and of course the levels of provision, the pressures on those levels of provision throughout the authority in terms of the places of Peru and things like that. So that's my point, Chair.
Actually, I want to come into that. I mean, my feeling on exclusions, obviously, is probably a little bit different. I don't think they should be going home. I want to know what efforts we're making with nurture groups and in-school exclusion, rather, because obviously the worry is once they're home, they're out of that routine, and then you're going to have to integrate them back in. So, yeah, that's my question. Obviously, I agree that you need to sometimes take them out of class, but I don't want to see children being sent home.
So what we've been working on, a big part of the strategy that we have is actually building that in-school provision, knowledge and experience. I mean, probably a lot of you as governors will know that in your own schools, schools are developing things like nurture provisions, smaller SEN classes, would have advice from our pupil referral unit, would have, we have the assessment centre at Maindy, which is a key part where the young person remains in their home school, but has that, significant advice and support. And a part of the school-to-school work we've been doing as part of the additional learning needs work, we have a group that focuses on social, emotional and behaviour difficulties, and part of that group is about sharing good practice and developing resources. So I know lots of schools have developed their own in-house provision, working with the EAS, and some of the monies from the Wellbeing and the Looked After Children's grants have been on training for nurture, training for Thrive is another one. SEAL is a very important strategy, and lots of schools now are developing their own provisions which kind of sit under ours then, and they can have advice and support from us. So schools are looking at training and support in-house so they can, give children that help and support to allow them to stay in their home school. Because as you said, it's important, that's their community, those are the people they know, those are the people that know them. So it's enabling them before we take further steps and we go towards. But like I said, it's about having a range of provision and support in place. And certainly I've seen a growth in school provision over the last few years, and it continues to grow as schools develop and change.
Yeah, I just add that children don't need to be sitting at home. They can still be in school, excluded. That's my point, actually. But you still have to have that provision in school, and not just an empty classroom with a TA who's been just given that role. That's not the way to do it.
It's about understanding the reasons for that young person, isn't it, and what's going on. I think similar to what we talked about young people who don't attend. It's about understanding that individual young person's needs. They might need a very specific intervention or package of support to help and support them to be in the classroom and integrate. And like I said, there's lots of ways of doing that via small group and one-to-one support, or sort of internal exclusion methods, or working with young people in different ways. So that's a very important part.
And we also know that sometimes excluding the child is exactly what they want, and they may see that behaviour encouraged, and that's something to discourage them. For some of the young people, it's the very opposite.
I want to come back in. Actually, I should have asked this on attendance, but it just came to me. I've had a few. I'm not sure all the details, I'm not sure how the system works exactly, but this is around the education welfare. Apparently the system has changed this year, and there's like another step apparently. So the officers aren't getting involved as early as they would have in years past. So I was wondering if that's a problem, and also leading to exclusions of bad habits becoming ingrained. I don't know if you've got any.
What was happening in the past was that EWOs were given referrals where school hadn't completed really what they should have done prior to the referral to the Education Welfare Officer. Part of the Strive 95 is to ensure that the school does complete their part, and then it's referral to the Education Welfare Officers. So us as Education Welfare Officers are actually dealing with the worst cases, which takes up a significant amount of time. If we were asked to do this, that and the other all the time, we were finding that it was too much, to be honest, and the school wasn't doing their bit. So, but it is working now. We recognise there was one step too many, and when we reviewed this, we took that step out. So now the process is quicker, because you don't want it to go on too far, because it gets to a point you actually think it needs to be referred to an Education Welfare Officer, and we recognise that, took a step out, so the process is shorter.
And it comes back to what I said at the beginning. Attendance is the school's responsibility. They know their pupils far better than we do in the LA, and it's about then the school demonstrated that they've done everything that they can do initially, and that then we are there then to support and guide, and as Vicky mentioned, those complex cases where actually the school needs that support, that's when they refer in to us. And what we did see, when we reviewed the strategy back in the summer term, we found that there were inconsistencies, not just with schools, but in our own practice as well within the team, that we weren't quite giving schools a consistent messages. So we've addressed that. We've looked at the strategy, as Vicky says, we've reviewed it and amended it, so it should be more efficient. And equally then we've put training. Vicky conducted a whole state training for our EWOs in September. We've also then conducted training for the school clerks, attendance officers, and there'll be ongoing training so that we can do everything we can for that consistent approach and the consistent message.
With regard to the training, actually in the training itself during discussions, the schools were sharing their own good practices. So that was, certain things were taken on board and taken back to other schools, and I can see them being implemented now.
Okay, another one from me then. I was just asking around transition from primary to secondary. So obviously if you know you've got a pupil with problems, sort of the provision in place there, but also around the engagement with parents, because obviously it's going to be very different at primary level. They probably know the teacher, and how are we tackling that, and are we seeing the continuing problems, or are we managing to nip it in the bud?
Within each cluster there are enhanced transitions that we see some clusters, schools and clusters work really, really well, and they don't leave it till year 6. They've started already at year 5, which is what we would encourage, or the soonest, or even below, especially if it's a family with several siblings within, they'd be on the radar a lot sooner. So we encourage our schools, and we see very good practice in that. And not only would that include attendance, but it would include the whole package that child, whether it's ALN, whether it's to do with exclusions, any of those needs, depending on that child's needs, we would encourage schools initially, and we would support with that enhanced transition. And we do see some fantastic examples across the borough. The Absachan cluster, for example, has a very good enhanced transition, which we encourage then across the borough, the schools to see.
Just to come in as well, part of the enhanced transition protocol, it is across Torfaen, so as the local authority we run the sessions. Now we'll be running the one for schools in January, and there's an entire process where schools will look at their cohorts, will highlight children, not just those, like I said, attendance, but additional learning needs, and vulnerable pupils as well, because pupils might be fine in their primary schools where they have a consistent approach, but there might be some concerns about them going to secondary school. So all those pupils are highlighted, and the secondary school takes the lead in that, and we have a lead transition coordinator in the secondary schools. They link with all of their feeder primary schools, and as a local authority we help and support them with that, and we do a range of practice. So our pupil referral unit will run additional sessions for pupils in need, so they'll have quite a bespoke transition. Some pupils have an entirely bespoke transition programme that starts from the spring term onwards. Others don't need that much, but just need highlighting so schools are aware of them. So that's the other part.
Again, where we see good practice, we know schools are already having those conversations way down. They're not leaving it until year 6. They've had those conversations. And likewise with the families as well. Various people will be working alongside those families all through their school life, and will continue then as and when necessary. If we go on to the next section now, there's more questions on exclusions. So, okay, education other than arts.
Right, education other than at school encompasses several different areas. So the first one is obviously the education other than at school we provide via our pupil referral unit. Torfaen have one EOTAS provision, and that is our pupil referral unit. It's split into several sections. So there's our main pupil referral unit for those children who have behaviour difficulties, and then we have a small group at New Inn for pupils that have social emotional anxiety difficulties. And as part of the pupil referral unit we also have tuition. So that's tuition for pupils who have medical needs, they're unable to attend school, or tuition for those students that have been excluded for lengthy periods of time and require or permanently excluded, and we put tuition in the interim until the process is ended. And then the other part of that is elected home education as well. So we have a number of different areas under that. In terms of our pupil referral unit, obviously that's managed by the local authority, and schools will come to us after we have a protocol where they have to have taken certain steps before a young person can be referred to us for a placement, and that goes through the local authority panel where we have obviously school representatives and representatives from all of our services as well there to make sure that the young people receiving placements are the correct young people. And some young people will go to the Pro for a short term, and they can go for an assessment period, and others will be there longer term if that's what their education requires. Some then will move on to other more specialist provisions if that's deemed necessary, and others will go back to their home school after a particular piece of work. Very much the same with our anxiety group children. And for tuition, obviously that is short term, because a young person might come out for a particular medical need or undergoing treatment, unable to attend school for a period of time. That is all supported by medical evidence, and we link heavily with medical services for that, to make sure the young people are accessing education where they need. In terms of elective home education, that is part of EOTAS, and where parents have elected to not educate their children at school, in line with Welsh trends and obviously national trends. We've seen an increase in that over the last few years, but certainly last year's EOTA census, 21 out of 22 local authorities had seen an increase. We've seen an increase, but not as much as some other areas. But that's definitely an upward trend for us, and one we continue to monitor as best we can under current legislation. But obviously, as you all know from news and things like that, we are expecting further advice and guidance from Welsh Government out in the spring term regarding home education.
Thanks. So looking at the electively home educated pupils, they're just points I noted really in the report, and I just wondered if there was any further background. More girls than boys, I thought that was quite interesting. I just wondered whether there was any reason or rationale behind that, and also the rise in pupils being home educated with ALN and anxiety. I can't get my words out today. And anxiety. Is it because parents are not feeling that their children's needs are being met in the education system, or perceived that they're not being met? Rather, what are the reasons behind that? I'm just a bit concerned about the rise in additional learning needs.
We are talking very, very small numbers, because obviously of the 91 pupils, that's across the entire year span, and obviously that's accumulated. So with the 20, we had 24 pupils in total last year, and they will come out to school for a variety of reasons. So we're talking, the majority will be parental preference. That's what they wish to happen. Regarding ALN and anxiety, some families do feel that, and do feel that they, because of what's going on with their child's life at the moment, they might be having significant input from other areas or services, that they wish to withdraw them to educate them themselves at home, and that is the best for them themselves and their families. When children do come out to be home educated, obviously we have a whole entire system where we work with social care, health and services. So, and we obviously understand that schools will have done a great deal of work with pupils before, and sometimes parents feel for that time that is the best for their child, and that doesn't mean to say they home educate them forever. Sometimes those children go back into school, and sometimes it's young people will need that break and then are ready to go in once they're well and able to again. But it's about, like I said, keeping in touch and making sure they're making those decisions for the right reasons, and they know that help and support that can be put in is necessary. So that's part of the home education officer's job, is to make sure that the parents, you know, have access to all the services and make sure they continue to access while they're out of school. But each individual case is very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, following on from that, because I was looking at the figures, so obviously that we had more elective home educated than Newport, for example, which seemed, you know, obviously difference in numbers. So obviously, you know, as an education authority, our concern is that because of dissatisfaction with our schools, you know, obviously we want to support parental choice, but if it comes down to they feel we're not doing enough. So my particular questions were around, for example, there was only one managed move last year. I mean, is that seen as a viable option? You know, for example, bullying and, you know, issues within school. And just that, I mean, you know, from an anecdotal thing, I was talking to somebody who was homeschooling a child, and that was because they felt their child was bullied at school and the school didn't do enough to tackle it. You know, are we seeing issues like that still, or, you know, just in general, some comments around that?
Well, in relation to the managed moves, obviously that is a choice between schools, school to school working. Obviously the local authority are involved at certain stages, but that initial stage is very much done between the school and the parents having that decision. So managed moves is a difficult one, because sometimes you could be moving the issues and the difficulties rather than solving them. So it's not something that works for everybody. And so, like I said, that is a choice for the parents and the schools really. But that's an avenue that you know, we do suggest as part of the strategies to keep young people in school. That if relationships and strategies have broken down, it could be that a new school is beneficial. But sometimes for some people with anxiety and ALN, moving to a different school with new sets of people getting to know you isn't always the best option. In terms of you know, when we go out to visit parents, obviously we offer all parents advice and support. Some people feel certainly that the cases that you mentioned might be the case, and they didn't feel necessary, but it's part of our job then to pick up that with them. So we'll discuss with parents if they want to. They'll obviously engage with us and tell us, you know, was there anything, was this tried, was that tried? And, you know, in some cases we have been able to go out and say to parents, well, actually, this could be done and this could be done, or you could access this and access that. And parents then think, oh, well, I won't home educate, I'll put my child back into school and we can help and support them with advice and guidance. Or we've been out to meetings, or we've held meetings to go back out and involve some of the support services to help those children. So for us, it's about communication with his parents, because quite often they'll only come to home educate where they feel is the last resort, but actually when they talk it through. So we've got strategies within schools, and the Education Welfare Service are part of that, where a family starts to think that might be an option, or it's talked about. We have information and guidance, and our contact details are given, so they can talk those elements through with us beforehand to make that informed choice, because obviously it is a massive step for parents to take.
Yeah. On home education, what sort of levels of input? Because obviously, I don't suppose parents have to accept input from us if they choose to home educate their children. So, what sort of levels of engagement are we seeing across the borough? Are families wanting to engage with the support on offer?
As you said, it is completely voluntary. Obviously, we haven't. It's no rights to go out in the. But what we find is a lot of parents choose to engage. Even our long-standing home educators will choose to engage. We, in line with obviously Estin and Welsh Government regulations, every home educator is written to or emailed. It depends what their preference of communication is, or phoned, and we do that at least annually for those parents that obviously need that little bit extra support. It can be as often as they want. What we say is we're there for as little or as much as they want advice and support, and what we try to develop with parents is that they have that relationship with us, that they can ask for advice and support, and that isn't a bad thing. And sometimes it's about giving them a specific piece of advice. They might have been home educated for a while, but they might need advice and support about GCSEs, or they might need support about accessing certain other services, because whilst they're home educated, they can still access things like careers advice, some of our post-16 and post-14 to 19 services. So it's about that control. But when parents first choose to home educate, we normally get a very good response to them coming and working. And I think it's about developing that relationship. Once they realise you're not there to... the old word used to be inspect them, you know, we're coming to inspect you. It's about having that relationship and working with parents and developing that trust. That's why we try to normally work with other agencies involved with families as well. So if they're involved with other agencies, it's often a good way of going out and meeting families. So I'm not this new person that's coming along and with my clipboard going to answer and, you know, do this. It's about promoting that we're there to work with them and answer questions. And yes, we do have a statutory duty to monitor and make sure things are there, but ultimately we want the best thing for the young person, and if that's what they've chosen, that's about working for them. So it varies in answer. So a long way going about those. But,
I just want to ask, back on elective home education, but children who are never enrolled. So obviously it's difficult because, you know, how many do we know of? You know, are we seeing that same engagement from parents? Because obviously it's different if you've had a child in school and you then take them out, you know what a step it is. Whereas if you go in, you know, straight in, obviously there's no obligation of them to tell us, and, you know, just sort of wondering how much engagement we get.
It can vary. We have lots of families who, even though they've never sent their child to school, they recognise that it is very important to work with the local authority, and we have parents who will phone us up, or parents, so if they've moved in from other local authorities where they've home educated, will phone us and say, look, I'm just letting you know I've moved into the area, I elected to home educate, and we do keep a database of those young people with parents' consent. Obviously, there'll always be those children we don't know about. In future, we might, you know, Welsh Government might go down the route of having to formally register, but from speaking to home educators and groups, that's a lot of them feel it's an important part to work with the local authority, and even if it's just you know, a cursory phone call to say, yes, we're home educated, and we do that. We send the same letters out to them. You know, if you choose to engage, normally we'll get we're still home educating, thank you, everything's still the same. However, I have had conversations with some parents who've always home educated, particularly around GCSEs and things like that. That's very difficult for obviously home educating parents to navigate the system, and sometimes they'll phone us up for advice and support because we might know schools within the area who will take private candidates for GCSEs. We might know of other home educated families who are doing certain subjects, or some of our young people, some of our families might ask to come into school to sit specific GCSE subjects, for instance, and they might ask if that's possible, because obviously some subjects are very difficult to do home educated, particularly sciences and some of the arts and music. So they might ask, would we be able to link with our schools to see if the young people might go in. So we've had some of that as well.
We heard some really positive stuff earlier about the support available for pupils with anxiety and mental health issues and stuff. If we've got pupils being home educated because of those reasons, are they still able to access some of the support that's available?
It is obviously more difficult when young people are home educated, because obviously they've opted out of some of our support systems. But what we would do is when a young person is home educated, we automatically notify health. So where there have been those sorts of concerns, we'll work with individual families and cases to make sure they're still accessing. So it might be more support from the GP or things like that, or CAMS. You know, we've links with CAMS within our service that we can phone and ask for. Young people on waiting list, etc., and things like that. And obviously there are cases where, as a local authority, we can ask for services to go in. We might have an education psychologist going out to see a young person as a specialist circumstance because something needs to, happen, or particularly where your family are wishing to put a young person back into school and there might be issues. So it very much varies. Obviously, a lot of the services are school-based only now, but as a local authority, we are able to put in some services and we are able to work with health. And those young people where we do have concerns about sort of their anxiety, mental health and things like that, we can work with parents and suggest we come out and visit more often. And some of our families we go out to termly to see. Some of them we see more regularly, obviously with the parents' consent, just to keep an eye and make sure things are fine.
I got one question about the geographic spread. So it was noted that there's more sort of around the Aberystwyth cluster. Just was any reason for that? And also more generally in terms of, like, obviously with school programmes and closures, etc., what impact is that having on attendance, exclusions, etc.? Are we seeing a direct correlation, or is it?
Direct correlation in regards to school closures. Although that mapping exercise hasn't been done, but nothing's jumping out that would suggest it's along the lines of school closures. But in regards to home elective?
Yeah, it's more around the outside.
Okay.
Like I said, it's difficult because whilst they have had the majority, we are still talking very, very small numbers. So what you find is some of those are parental preference, that the children might have got to a certain stage in their education, the parents have chosen to take them out. Some of them, if an older sibling comes out, the younger siblings come out of the primary school. We've seen that, so we've had families of sort of 3 or 4 young people coming up, but of course they go over the trajectory. And some of them, it's individual reasons why really we're talking such small numbers. But like I said, it just so happens when you look at the correlation, they do have the biggest number. They can be for very individual reasons. So it's hard to pinpoint.
So we just want some reassurance. There's not like some, a particular reason that we can address. So one more question around. Pupil referral units. So obviously you've seen that some are short term, some are longer term. I was just wondering about the transition back into the mainstream schools. What sort of support are we offering there, to make sure they stay engaged?
Well, what happens is when a young person comes out of school, obviously the school, they remain on that school road, the pupil is dual registered, so the home school will always remain that child's school, and any, whilst they're at the PRU, the school will attend meetings, they'll be part of any package of support, because ultimately if the young person is able to go back, obviously that's where we want them to be once they've had the correct help and support, if that's a viable option for them. So the schools stay involved, and the PRU have termly planning meetings and half-termly planning meetings with the pupil referral unit. So there's a plan put in place. When a young person is reintegrated, it's done obviously depending on the young person, very slowly and at the young person's pace. So it might be that they go for initial sessions or lessons back into school, first of all, picking things that they like, or subjects that are good for them, and then a gradual transition back over time, and that's usually supported by either our pupil referral staff or our outreach staff, and so that move goes back into school, so the school can have that advice and support going back in. And obviously there's an awful lot of learning being done about that young person whilst they've been at the PRU, things that have been trialled and tested and systems that work, so all of that learning can go back into school with the young person. So it is a sort of varies really across the, each individual child, but certainly we don't say you finished on a Monday, this Friday, and you go back in on a Monday.
Thank you, Chair. Just clarification. If a child is excluded from the PRU, is that kept as an exclusion from the school or from the PRU? And I notice there's no data of exclusions from the PRU in here. So, and I'm not saying that they're not there. So I haven't seen them, so I just couldn't find them. Sorry, but I'm just clarification.
If the young person is at the pupil referral unit for the main amount of time, because obviously we have some young people that might be there part-time or things like if that's their main place of being there, so i.e. they're there 5 days a week or 4 days a week, the exclusion would be against the pupil referral unit for the time the young person is there, because obviously they are the main educators of that young person, but the school are kept aware of any exclusions, but they don't actually count on their figures at that point in time. Yeah, they'll be in the appendices. The Crown Bridge and the pupil referral unit are at the bottom because they're separate institutions.
Okay, are there any... There's something else I want to draw our attention to in the report. So any more general questions, and so anything overarching that anyone has forgotten to ask? Or?
Yeah. Got a graph here with I find it astonishing that Crossy Kellogg and Westmorn have increased the exclusions, and yet a school like Aberystwyth have come down to about 150. So obviously Aberystwyth is doing something right. Has anybody from Aberystwyth gone to see these other schools and say what they're doing right? Or are you involved with that?
What we're seeing...
Because obviously somebody's doing a good job there, isn't he?
Yes, across exclusions, and we'll bring attendance in. We've also seen that exclusions and attendance in Aberystwyth have improved, and across the Ceiliog and Westmorn, we're not seeing the same rate of improvement for attendance or exclusions. They're quite the opposite. Absolutely, we're sharing good practice across the borough, not just for Westmorn and across the Ceiliog, but also Cwmbran High as well. They equally have reduced their exclusions, improved their attendance. So it's about sharing good practice across the borough, and we do know that staff from Westmorn have visited Aberystwyth and other schools as well, to share that good practice. Because, as you said, they've obviously worked very hard at turning things round. And especially in Aberystwyth's case, where earlier in this year they were removed from Estyn, and that was part of, not completely, but exclusions, because they'd reduced their exclusions, because they'd increased their attendance as well. That was recognised during the monitoring visit there earlier in the year.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've heard a lot about best practice and sharing good practice, which I'm really big on. I think this is really positive. How do we go about ensuring that that best practice is shared around schools? I know you in part answered my questions about schools, visiting schools, but do we formalise that at all, or is it more an informal approach between schools?
As Vicky mentioned, in regards to attendance, where she mentioned earlier, where she's now going with members of staff from that school to another school because the systems are working and they're seeing an increase and improvement from this time last year. So that is something the school initiates, but we encourage as well, strongly encourage, if that answers that question. Because we can't force it in that respect, but what we can do is, it's all about the self-improving systems, isn't it? And working within clusters and sharing that good practice then. And it's more about turning it on its head, rather than asking school, well, why aren't you going then? Rather than, if you're not going, great. If you've got a better system that you're trialling, okay, that needs time. But what are the reasons for not going? Rather than enforcing them to go. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's about working with the school, isn't it? And building those relationships.
Just have one last one, just around the pupil voice. You know, how much input are schools have? You know, are they listening to pupils? Is this just coming from school council, or are schools actively engaging with pupils on all aspects, really, what problems they're having, how to encourage attendance, etc.?
I think each school will have their own annual parent survey. They'll also have their own pupil questionnaires as well. And again, some are more proactive than others. But I think if you go around our schools now, they're all involved. Pupil voice is having a far, far greater emphasis. Estyn are looking at pupil voice when they're looking at inspections as well. And also it's about the rights of the child as well and the young person. And I think that is, there's still a piece of work to be done, but it is, I'd say, where we're seeing good practice, that's definitely the case, and it's about that encouraging them. But to be fair to most of our schools, they're certainly on that journey. Some are further down than others. And likewise, we are, as an LA as well, we've recognised that that's a piece of work we need to do as well with LAs, within the LA.
I just want to say as well, in addition to that, obviously as with the new ALN bill coming in, personal-centred practice is a cornerstone of that, really. So all of our work moving forward is around planning and provision for the young people. So for instance, if we are looking at placements at any of our provisions, the young person's voice is very much a part of that, because actually it's the young person's education journey, and they might not want to go to pupil referral unit. They might not want to move from their home school. So that's a much a part of our planning when we make our decisions, as obviously the information we have, and personal-centred planning in terms of having lots of our young people now, you'll see out in schools, will have one-page profiles telling you about we'll have personal-centred reviews where the young person's at the heart of it. So that's definitely, Torvine were one of the core members of that group of the statement in Or Something Better some time ago, and obviously now we're seeing that in reality with the bill coming in 2020, and all of our schools moving towards that more personal-centred practice, not just for pupils who have additional learning needs or vulnerable learners, but all pupils to have their learning targeted and individualised for themselves.
Thank you very much. We'll let you go. Okay, so we're looking at recommendations now then.
We get more each other every day.
Yeah, we got the heating on.
Sorry about that.
Okay then, recommendations. Now we're a bit warmer. Anybody got anything that they want to suggest off the bat?
What I would like to say is that they were very forthright. They answered every question. They didn't sort of go to have a second to get the pony pulled, so I'm happy with the results. But is there anything as a committee we can...
I think the main thing I saw come out of that was sharing good practice. That's got to be a recommendation. I think that's the word I kept hearing time and time again, every question.
I think, obviously...
Collaborative work, I think, is the fancy term, is it not?
Yeah, exactly. If they can more formalise that and get it, up and running, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The other one was the gentleman there asked for more details on the...
I think we need to put this in context. I just looked at the figures here. We're still ranked 17th out of 22nd in number of exclusions per thousand. So while she talked about improvements, well, yes, if you look at the last 4 years, actually, it's gone up and down. So, yes, she's about to say they're improvements. But so I would be always wary of, what I'm hearing, good news stories, and try to extrapolate actually what is the story. And 17th out of 22 still puts us in the bottom quartile. Admittedly, this is an urban local authority, so one would expect potentially the figures to be low. But over the AS as a whole, that's the worst performing consortium. So, but then again, if you compare it with, say, Central South, similar sort of consortium, they are much better. So, while you can talk about sharing good practice within, there must be good practice at a consortium level as well. There should be, obviously the AS aren't taken on board because Central South seem to be doing a better job from a similar population base.
I agree with that. We can't just look internally. And also around exclusions, my feeling is that they're still too high. I know that they're trying to bring them down. But, these in-school provision can be done, is being done in some schools, and perhaps we ought to recommend that we try and speed that process up because, so once the kid's out of school, then, Exactly. And you know, we've seen some great practice, especially at primary school level. We've got some great nurture groups going on, and you know, we need to just speed up that rollout. And people to
include anybody who assaults, say, a member of staff. That's their policy, and that's the governance policy.
I agree with you.
So, you know, I mean, what I said, it's not a great situation to be. There still must be that option of exclusion, but there has to be a viable alternative for the children, for the excluded children, doesn't it? They need to be somewhere, not sitting at home. I certainly agree with that.
May I suggest that we get some more details on electronic registration and whether it can be enhanced? I think it's got to be the way forward. Everything else is electronic, but I think registration's sort of stuck in the dark ages to a certain degree. I don't know what this system is, and I would like more information on whether it can be enhanced or improved, and also managing pupils with medical or dental appointments, because obviously we're getting it right, but the schools out there are obviously not, and there's some very quick ways of getting around that. So we're not talking pupils out of school for a long period on these appointments. Half an hour maybe. It's a case of getting them into school, get them signed in, get them out, then get them back before the next registration.
I would suggest adding to that recommendation around the registration and offering the IT support, because most of our schools are using SRS support. I know, for example, some of the secondaries have had problems setting up an electronic system because of the IT structure. So I think we need to, as a authority, look at that, recommend that they do it, but also that we advise and support them to actually get these in place.
The great thing with electronic systems as well, then you've got the data coming through, because you'll have all the feedback, you know, when people breathe, and everything else. So you've got more accuracy, you've got more clarity. Yeah, it's a win-win. Got to be.
And it's also good for the parent engagement, because if you can have the automated text, etc., they know what's happening.
Yeah, no less.
No.
They just get them.
I just wanted to support what you said, Jess, really, around best practice, both on the exclusions and attendance. We had some great stuff there, some really good examples of where things have improved, and also where places are struggling. So, you know, and we know, obviously, from the answers given, that there's a lot of best practice being shared. Obviously, that's a voluntary thing, and quite rightly, you can't force schools. It's about strongly encouraging. But I would like to see perhaps that done in a more formal way. I don't know. I just wonder if there's a way of pushing that a bit harder.
Yeah, I think we've got a few there, so
I'll word them and then send them to you.
Okay. What's the next one then? Okay, so item 6 is the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee, the update report. So you're just being asked to note the recommendations that they've made, that the subcommittee's made following scrutiny on the performance of individual schools, and in particular support that schools receive from EAS and the LEA. So in particular, the committee's been invited to review the recommendations made by Schools Monitoring Sub and the responses to those recommendations, and, I'll talk louder, identify any key issues or areas they wish to add to their current work programme to enable more in-depth scrutiny to take place.
What page are you on?
We are, hang on, I've got to switch tabs now. 77, yeah.
77.
Yeah. So yeah, basically any comments and suggestions around these recommendations. Scroll it down. think also I should point out, for those who aren't on the subcommittee, we've suspended it at the moment while we're waiting for Welsh Government to give advice on which data we can use to scrutinise. Because obviously, there's no point getting a school in if you can't really ask them many questions. So I expect we'll be looking at the new year then and restart it, because we'll probably have to change the way we do it. Which at the moment is very data-driven, obviously, if you can't have the data. So any comments then on the recommendations, or are you happy to note? No. Yeah, okay. All that's left then. Date and time of next meeting. So the next meeting will be the 6th of February 2019. And we'll be looking at the EIS business plan and education attainment, including vulnerable learners. The new process that we're looking at is to sort of think of what our focus within that what will be at the meeting. So is anything jumping out at you in particular? Anybody that you would want to be inviting, or?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so moving forward at Scrutiny, we're sort of thinking about what we're doing at the next meeting, rather than just sort of saying it's happening. So obviously you don't have to do it right off the cuff now, but if you think of anybody that you would want to invite for that, or any particular focus you'd want to have, just email in and let us know. And something might come to you, that you particularly want to. I can't get my words out. Be raised. Yeah.
At your visioning session in June, I think members collectively agreed that the next item that would take place, I think it was February the 6th, would be on the EAS business plan and school attainment. So as part of that visioning session, as officers, based on what the chief officer, how he sold it to you then, shall we say, we filled out one of these report performers. So it's got all the information that the chief officer said, possible invitees, sources of information, focus of the required report. So we populated a template based on that session. So there's 2 of them for the meeting, which ideally means that's a 2 agenda item for the next meeting. But hopefully we can merge that into one, because it's on the EAS business plan and school attainment, which apparently in the past has been more or less the same sort of thing. Am I of the understanding? So I think what would be best...
if you are linking school attainment to the performance of the EAS, yes.
Yes.
This is an important meeting, because when the EAS just try to justify their existence, their increasingly debatable existence, frankly, in terms of what they're doing, and that has a massive impact on school performance, which of course has been not particularly good. So it's important that we are able to question them robustly again about their performance. I don't mind linking them both in, because they are inextricably linked. Well, they should be anyway.
I'll send these forms out to you so that you can have a look, and if there's anything you want added before I then send on to the chief officer to write their reports, just let me know. So I'll do that after this meeting, and then if you could let me know as soon as possible, because I'll have to start the ball rolling with this, with the impending Christmas period, to meet our deadline for the 6th of February.
Yeah. The basic idea is just so if we want invitees, we can make sure we get them in plenty of time, and there's, they can't say, oh, you didn't let us know when we can't get there. So especially with the AS, I think that's, Yeah. Yeah. But, if we wanted to, perhaps you could even invite somebody from another consortium, for example, and ask, comparative questions, this sort of thing. Anyway, I'll leave that with you. And so I may close the meeting. Thank you, members, for attending. I now declare the meeting closed.